You ever have one of those moments where you think, this is it? This is where I'm supposed to be? That's how I felt the first morning I woke up in this house. My name is Kevin, and this lake, this quiet stretch of water became my sanctuary after I lost my wife, Jane. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laugh, who dragged me out of bed on Saturdays just to watch the sunrise. She loved the water. Said it made her feel alive. So, when she got sick, and when we knew the end was coming, we made a promise: I'd find a place where our daughter and I could keep her memory close, somewhere that felt like a fresh start and a living tribute all at once. I'll be honest, the first time I saw this property, I laughed. I mean, who gets this lucky? A weathered dock, an old boathouse, and a view that could make even the worst days feel a little lighter. I pictured Jane here, sitting on the end of the dock with her feet in the water, our daughter trying to catch minnows in a jar. I signed the papers that same afternoon. I didn't even haggle. Some things, you just know. And yeah, I brought the boat. She's older than I am, but she's got character, kind of like me, I guess. Jane used to call her the family time machine. Every summer, we'd take her out, just the three of us, and for a little while, it felt like nothing could touch us. But, as it turns out, peace is a fragile thing. I'll never forget the first letter. It was from the Homeowners Association. Now, I know what you're thinking, HOA, right? How bad could it be? I thought the same thing. In fact, when I moved in, the neighbors all said, "Don't worry, the HOA's just a formality." They mostly organize the 4th of July picnic and make sure nobody paints their house neon green. That's what I believed. But this letter wasn't about a picnic. It was about my boat. Non-compliant with community standards, it said. Dock structure in violation of updated guidelines. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because I thought it was a joke. I mean, who complains about a boat that's been here longer than half the houses? I almost called Jane's sister to tell her about it, but then I thought, no, this'll blow over. But it didn't. A few days later, I met Laurel Spencer, the new HOA president. She had a clipboard, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a way of talking that made you feel like you'd already lost an argument you didn't even know you were having. She told me, very politely, that the board had decided to raise the bar for the community. We want to keep property values up, she said. We want everything to look harmonious. I tried to explain about Jane, about the boat, about the memories we'd built here. She nodded, made a note on her clipboard, and handed me another notice, this one with a deadline. You ever get that feeling? Like you're being nudged out of your own life, one little rule at a time. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't going away. This wasn't just about a boat or a dock. This was the start of a fight I never asked for, but one I couldn't walk away from. Because this place, this lake, this home was all I had left of Jane. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that away. So, that's where my story begins. With a letter. With a boat. And with a promise to myself, to my daughter, and to Jane that I would stand my ground, no matter what came next. You know, at first, I thought maybe the HOA just wanted to keep things tidy. I mean, I get it, no one wants a rusted-out car on cinder blocks in the front yard. But this? This was something else. It started with a letter about my boat. Too old, they said. Not in harmony with the community's standards. I remember reading that and actually laughing. I mean, this boat's been here longer than most of the houses. Jane and I had painted her together. She was part of the landscape, as much a fixture as the willow tree by the dock. But the letters kept coming. One about the dock dash, not up to code, even though I had the permits framed on my office wall. Another about the color of my mailbox. Then, believe it or not, a warning about the way I stack my firewood. I started to feel like I was living in a sitcom, except the laugh track was just me, alone at the kitchen table, shaking my head. I tried to do things the right way. I went to the next HOA meeting, thinking maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Laurel Spencer was at the head of the table, clipboard in hand, talking about community standards and property values like she was running a Fortune 500 company, not a neighborhood association. I stood up, showed everyone my permits, explained the history, how the dock had been approved, how the boat was part of the community for years. She listened, nodded, and then handed me another notice. This one had a deadline. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and possible legal action. The room was silent. Some neighbors looked at their shoes. A couple gave me sympathetic smiles. But no one spoke up. I mean, I think it's unfair, but I don't want to get on Laurel's bad side, you know. Another, quietly supportive. Bernie's boat is part of the lake. But the board, they're getting strict. I got a letter about my flower pots last month. At this point, it felt like I couldn't win. Every time I tried to talk, the rules changed. Every conversation ended with more threats, fines, legal action, even hints that I might lose my property if I didn't fall in line. I started to wonder if I was the only one getting these notices, or if the whole community was under siege. That's when the intimidation started. First, it was just board members taking pictures of my house early in the morning, late at night. Then, anonymous letters started showing up in my mailbox. People are talking, one said. Another warned, you're making things harder for everyone. Rumors started swirling. Someone said I was planning to rent out my house to college kids, another claimed I was polluting the lake. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. It wasn't just me. I started hearing stories from other neighbors about fines for garden gnomes, for having a flag that was too large, for leaving a kayak out overnight. One family got a violation for their kids' chalk drawings on the driveway. It was like we were all walking on eggshells. Laurel, we want to maintain the highest standards. We can't make exceptions, or the whole community suffers. Except, I noticed, some people never seemed to get letters. There was a board member with a jet ski parked right by the water. Another had a fire pit that definitely wasn't up to code. But no one said a word to them. Rules for some, not for others. They pick and choose who to go after. If you're on their good side, you're fine. If not, good luck. That's when I realized this wasn't about boats or docks or garden gnomes. This was about control. About power. And it wasn't just me in their sights. One night, after another anonymous letter, I decided to do some digging. I started going through public records, old meeting minutes, anything I could find. That's when I stumbled on something strange: a series of closed-door meetings between the HOA board and a local developer. Snippets of conversations about unlocking the lake's potential, about increasing revenue streams. I overheard Laurel on the phone one evening, talking about moving certain obstacles out of the way. The more I dug, the more I realized, this wasn't just about enforcing rules. This was about money. About erasing everything this community once stood for, and turning it into something unrecognizable. The lakefront wasn't just my refuge, it was prime real estate, and I was standing in the way. I started documenting everything: every notice, every conversation, every suspicious meeting. I talked to neighbors, and slowly, people started to open up. We shared stories, compared letters, and pieced together the pattern. We weren't just dealing with a strict HOA. We were up against a campaign to push out anyone who didn't fit the new vision for the lake. You know, Jane always said I was stubborn. She'd probably be laughing at me now, knee-deep in paperwork, fighting City Hall or, in this case, the HOA. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let them erase her memory, or the life we'd built here. Neighbors meeting quietly in living rooms, sharing coffee and stories. We decided to stand together. It started small, a few of us at first, then more. We wrote letters, attended meetings, and demanded transparency. We asked for copies of the board's decisions, for records of the closed-door meetings. We pushed back, politely but firmly. And the more we pushed, the harder the board pushed back. Fines doubled. Threats escalated. Laurel started showing up at my property with a tape measure, checking every inch of the dock. Board members began spreading rumors that I was planning to sue the HOA, that I was trying to destroy the community. I guess in a way, I was. At least, the version of the community they wanted, a place where fear kept everyone quiet, where the rules only applied to the people they didn't like. I got a letter saying they'd put a lien on my house if I didn't take down my swing set. My kids cried for days. That's when I knew we had to do more. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, about standing up to the bullies, about protecting our homes, our memories, our right to belong. So, we started organizing. We formed a coalition, pooled our resources, and reached out to legal experts. We learned about our rights, about due process, about how HOAs are supposed to work not as private fiefdoms, but as stewards of the community. We documented every instance of selective enforcement, every violation of open meeting laws, every threat and rumor. That's when we discovered the developer's Plan A blueprint for luxury condos, a new marina, and private access for premium residents. And right in the middle of it all, my dock. My boat. My home. I knew then that this fight was bigger than me. It was about the soul of the community, about whether we'd let fear and greed win, or whether we'd stand together and say, enough. And that, my friends, is how a letter about an old boat turned into a battle for our future. I'll be honest with you, there were moments when I thought about just giving up. The constant letters, the threats, the whispers behind my back, it wore me down. But something inside me refused to let this be the end of our story. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. Not just for me, but for my daughter, for Jane's memory, and for every neighbor who was quietly suffering. So, I started documenting everything. Every notice, every meeting, every threat, every suspicious phone call. I kept a journal, recorded conversations when I could, and took photos of every violation letter. I even started recording some of the HOA meetings, those public meetings where they pretended everything was above board. I reached out to neighbors, and slowly, people started to come forward. They shared their stories, some whispered at first, afraid of retaliation, others with tears in their eyes, relieved to finally be heard. We realized we weren't alone. There was a pattern of selective enforcement, intimidation, and outright bullying. Interview with a property lawyer, seated in a well-lit office. Property lawyer. Selective enforcement and intimidation are classic signs of HOA abuse. Homeowners have rights, but those rights are only as strong as the evidence they can present and the allies they can rally. The key is to document everything meticulously and build a case that can't be ignored. So, we formed a coalition. We called ourselves the Lakefront Homeowners Alliance. We met weekly, shared documents, strategized, and supported each other. It was empowering to know we weren't fighting alone. An environmental consultant standing near the lake, pointing to sensitive areas. Environmental consultant. The proposed development would have devastating effects on the lake's ecosystem. Increased runoff, habitat destruction, and pollution would threaten native species and degrade water quality. It's not just a property dispute, it's an environmental crisis. Armed with this information, we filed for an injunction against the HOA and the developer. We cited environmental impact reports, property deed restrictions, and violations of open meeting laws. The legal battle had officially begun. Lawyers arguing, the judge listening intently, community members sitting in the gallery. The courtroom was intimidating. The HOA had hired a team of lawyers, and the developer had deep pockets. But we had something they didn't, the truth, and a community united. Then came the breakthrough. While digging through county records, we discovered the original lakefront deeds. Not only did I own my dock, but I also owned a significant stretch of the shoreline property the HOA had no right to control or sell. An interview with a county official in their office. County official. The HOA had clearly overstepped its authority. Their attempts to enforce rules on privately owned land were legally unfounded. The developer's plans were built on shaky ground, and the injunction was well justified. With the truth on our side, we finally had leverage. The tide was turning. What began as a personal fight had become a movement to protect our homes, our environment, and our community's future. But the fight was far from over. This was just the beginning. I'll never forget that day. The final HOA meeting. I'd been to plenty before, usually half empty, with folks more interested in the snacks than the agenda. But this time, the room was packed. I could feel the tension as soon as I walked in. People were whispering, clutching their own folders, eyes darting between me and the board at the front. You could tell something big was about to happen. Laurel Spencer sat at the head of the table, clipboard in hand, her usual calm replaced by a tight, forced smile. She tried to call the meeting to order, but the room wouldn't quiet down. For the first time, people weren't just there to listen, they were there to be heard. Laurel taps her pen, trying to regain control. Laurel, let's stick to the agenda, please. We have procedures for a reason. I stood up and said, with all due respect, Laurel, the community deserves answers. We deserve transparency. And tonight, we're going to get it. I started with the basics: how the rules had changed, how enforcement was selective, how neighbors had been threatened and silenced. I read statements from families too scared to speak. I showed the environmental report, highlighting the irreversible damage the proposed development would cause. Then, the deed, the original, signed and sealed, proving the HOA had no authority over my dock or the shoreline they'd promised to the developer. Neighbors began to murmur, then clap. A few board members shift uncomfortably. One quietly gathers their things and leaves. I wasn't alone. One by one, neighbors stood up. Some shared their own stories about fines for minor infractions, about being ignored when they asked for help, about feeling like outsiders in their own homes. Others simply nodded, tears in their eyes, grateful someone was finally standing up. Local journalist, speaking to the camera outside the meeting. Local journalist. This case exposed the darker side of HOA power, how easily it can be abused when left unchecked, and how quickly a community can be divided by fear. But it also showed what can happen when people come together and demand accountability. Back to the meeting. Laurel tries to interject, but the room is no longer hers. Another board member stands and announces their resignation. Two more follow. The remaining members look at each other, unsure what to do. Laurel, this is all very dramatic, but dash. Neighbor, interrupting, no, Laurel. This is justice. The judge rules in favor of the homeowners. The development is halted. The HOA is fined for misconduct. Laurel is removed from her position. The coalition cheers, hugs, and even a few tears of relief. When the ruling came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The court saw the truth. The development was stopped. The HOA was fined, and Laurel was out. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But it wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about restoring our community, about showing that ordinary people, when they stand together, can take back what's rightfully theirs. I wasn't just fighting for my family. I was fighting for every neighbor who'd ever been bullied into silence, for every child who deserved to grow up by a clean, safe lake, for every memory Jane and I had built here, and for all the new ones yet to come. We didn't just save our homes. We saved our community. And we did it together. It's funny, you know. After months of tension, after all those sleepless nights and heated meetings, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear, but the peaceful kind, the kind that settles in when you know you're safe, when you know you belong. Neighbors painted the new dock together, a group of kids fishing, a family planting wildflowers along the shoreline. My daughter giggles as she helps a neighbor's child release a frog back into the water. We didn't waste any time. The very next weekend, we held a community work day. It was the sort of thing Jane would have loved, everyone pitching in, sleeves rolled up, music playing from someone's old radio. We sanded and painted the dock, cleared trash from the shoreline, planted native grasses and flowers. There was laughter, and for the first time in a long while, hope. I can't remember the last time we all did something together. It feels like we're finally a real community again. It wasn't just the people who came back. The wildlife did too. The lake felt alive again, like it was breathing easier. It was as if the land itself knew we were finally taking care of it, not just fighting over it. We knew we had to protect what we'd fought for. That's why we established a conservation trust and agreement that the lakefront would never be sold off, never be developed, never be anything but a place for families and wildlife to thrive. We put it in writing, filed it with the county, and made sure every neighbor knew exactly what it meant. An interview with a new HOA board member, a retired teacher. New board member. We learned the hard way what happens when power isn't checked. Our promise is simple: transparency, fairness, and respect for everyone. We're here to serve, not to rule. We held workshops on homeowners' rights. We brought in legal experts to answer questions, and we created a hotline for reporting abuse, anonymous, confidential, and run by volunteers. No one would ever have to feel alone again. An interview with a neighbor who had once been afraid to speak up. Neighbor. I used to worry every time I saw a letter from the HOA. Now, I know I have a voice. We all do. Community potluck dinners, children's art displayed on a new bulletin board, a welcome sign at the entrance to the neighborhood. We celebrated every small victory. The first time someone called the hotline and got help, the first time a neighbor's request was approved without hassle, the first time we all sat down together for a meal and nobody argued about the rules. I think about Jane a lot on evenings like this. I can almost hear her laughter, see her smile as the sun dips below the trees. She would have loved what we've built here, a place where people look out for each other, where kids can play without fear, where the only thing stronger than the rules is the sense of belonging. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a turning point for our entire community. We learned that when we stand together, we can reclaim what's ours, not just the land, but our dignity, our peace, and our hope for the future. We're not just neighbors anymore. We're a family. And this lake, this home, will always be ours. You know, when I first set foot on this dock, I was searching for a way to hold on to the past. I wanted to keep Jane's memory alive for our daughter, to find some peace for myself. But standing here now, I see that what we built is so much bigger than just memories. We built a future where community means more than rules and regulations, where people look out for each other, and where no one is left to fight alone. Looking back, I realize Jane would have been proud. She always believed in standing up for what's right, even when it wasn't easy. We stood up not just for ourselves, but for everyone who calls this place home. And in doing so, we found a strength we didn't know we had. We found each other. If you're watching this and you're facing something similar, if your HOA is overreaching, if you feel powerless, if you're afraid, please remember, you have rights. Document everything. Every letter, every meeting, every conversation. Don't let yourself be isolated. Build alliances with your neighbors. Find your voice, and use it. Never let fear silence you. Justice isn't always easy. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's messy, and sometimes it feels like you're the only one fighting. But it's always worth it. Because when you stand up for what's right, you're not just protecting your own home, you're defending the very idea of community. This story is for Jane. For every memory we made, for every lesson she taught me about courage, kindness, and never backing down from a just cause. And it's for you, for every homeowner, every neighbor, every person who's ever felt small in the face of something bigger. Hold on to hope. Stand together. And remember, sometimes, the fight for what's right is the fight that brings us home.